On today's episode of the Escalation Podcast, I'm sitting down with a guest whose legal career stretches over 3 remarkable decades, and it's nothing short of extraordinary. Allan Yip began his journey at the bar and pivoted to the world of banking and finance law, joining Clifford Chance during the industry's most aggressive years of expansion. From there, he moved in-house, first at JP Chase and then at Bear Stearns. But it was in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis that his next chapter began. He joined Simmons & Simmons as a partner, where he went on to lead the buy-side derivatives practice during some of the most turbulent and transformative years in the industry. He retired in 2023, closing a career that not only witnessed the evolution of the derivatives industry, but he helped to shape it from the inside out. This is a conversation about what it takes to build an extraordinary career in banking and finance law, about faith, resilience, and leadership, from someone who's seen it all. Allan Yip, good morning, hello, and welcome to the Escalation Podcast.
Hi, editor. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for agreeing to sit down with me today. As I know, this is not something that you do often, especially now that you are retired. I am so much looking forward to having this conversation, not only about your career, your thoughts around negotiation secrets, the leadership, the global financial crisis, and also your views on escalation. So let's dive right in.
Great, looking forward to it.
I am really inspired by all the work that you've done in the industry. I think our listeners are going to be really, really excited to hear how that all came about, and also to understand at what cost, because sometimes that is a question that people don't realize and don't like to answer. But I really wanted to start with why law?
This is going to be a bit uninspiring because I don't think I ever consciously decided on a career in the law. Life. When I look back on my career now, life. When you look back on life, is always full of multiple little decisions. What seems like little decisions that then have a big impact. And I mentioned to you in the build-up that I became a Christian in my 40s. I now sort of look back and think of that. Okay, that's God having His little hand on me here. But
yes.
But irrespective of that, all these little decisions make up a whole life, a whole career. So when I grew up, I was a Chinese kid, one of 3 children of immigrants from Hong Kong. I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. My parents came over from Hong Kong in the 60s, didn't have any university education. They worked in a Chinese takeaway, which was all de rigueur back then, worked 6 days a week. They always instilled in me and my sisters the idea that education is the silver bullet for material success, and that stayed with me.
Wow.
Always, and there's something that I still believe. So I never considered myself a pioneer or anything like that. I wasn't one of those people who knew at 6 years old that I always wanted to be a lawyer or anything like that. I kind of just followed the path of my parents of saying, okay, education, and that will take you somewhere. So to answer your question, I fell into the law. I reached the end of my school career. I love reading, so I wanted to do English literature at school, and I was speaking to my form master, Mr. Taylor, who said, why are you doing English literature? Why don't you do something useful like law? And being a dutiful student, I just sort of, okay. That was it. So I did law at university, quite enjoyed it. And then everything sort of followed from there, really. And at the time, I suppose I was trying to be a little bit unconventional. I thought, okay, I want to qualify as a barrister. So I fancied myself a bit of an advocate in court. So I did that. But then I did the training, and after the training, thought, okay, this is not really what I want. So I then switched to finance law, which is when I joined. We're now mid-1990s.
Okay.
And at the time, Clifford Chance, I think then probably the biggest law firm in the world at that stage.
Yes.
The boom years, as long as you could speak English you were from a Commonwealth country or you were a barrister, you get a job. So I joined with this huge cohort of people and straight into a department, a derivatives department. Had
Wow.
no idea what a derivative was. I distinctly remember in the run up to the interview going to a bookshop in central London and sort of looking at the business section, trying to find out what a derivative was. And I
Wow.
remember going to an interview with a couple of partners there, and they said, "Oh, do you know what a derivative is?" And now I still can't believe I did this, but I'd read this definition of what a derivative was, and there was a definition of a derivative as a derivative is like a razor blade. On
No.
the one hand, you can use it to make yourself look nice in front of your wife, but if you use it wrongly, you can slit your own throat. And I said that in the interview, and they must have been shocked. But anyway, it couldn't have been too bad because they gave me a job.
And do you think today young professionals are qualifying, are going through the enough exposure to senior members of departments, at partnership level, obviously? We sometimes get asked, how do I position myself, especially for big firms like Clifford, Simmons and
Mm,
Simmons, etc. There is obviously a lot of competition.
mm,
And everyone is very unique, but at the same time, you need to have certain skill set to be able to stand out, but also to build rapport with your managing partner and your colleagues, and to be able to get involved in more exciting projects. I feel sometimes you need to go that extra mile. How do you position yourself in that place where you are the one who is being chosen to do a little bit more without having to compromise on your, as they say, life work balance? But what is your take on that? How do we get into that sweet spot?
Unfortunately, on the work-life balance question, the better you are at a job, the more you're going to be given, which is good
Yeah,
because you're given
yeah.
more responsibility, you're given more exposure to work and senior colleagues, but that is often at the expense of the work-life balance.
I agree, and I think it's more of a, for me, it's a series of trade-offs. But also, I've noticed that young people nowadays have a lot of expectations around work-life balance, and working from the office is one of them. I actually wanted to ask you about that because of the recent, discussion on social media, and famously, J.P. Morgan's Jamie
Mhm.
Dimon made a comment about, us needing to return to work. What is your take on that? I understand, learning through osmosis and people being around each other has got a huge impact, but also there is some valid studies coming through saying that, open work environment can be quite disruptive, and, your kind of deep work can be disrupted a number of times throughout the day, and then it takes up to 25 minutes to go back into your flow. How do we find a balance?
For lawyers, and I'm speaking only about lawyers in
Yes.
terms of training for lawyers, young lawyers, I think being in the office is really important. But that also means having senior people in the office as well. There's no point trainees and junior
Yes.
lawyers being in the office 5 days a week if the partners and the senior associates are only in 2 days a week or 3 days a week. There's no point
Yes.
at all, right? So there's got to be both. But I would go further and say that my view is that having open plan arrangements is also detrimental to the ability of young lawyers and trainees to learn. Remember that it's harder for a junior lawyer. It's harder to have those conversations. When I was sharing an office with a junior lawyer, and typically I tried to get I'd arrange it so that there would be a newly qualified lawyer would sit with me for a year, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. For me, it's like an open conversation. You start a single conversation per day. You start it in the morning. Hello, blah, 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 what you've been doing. And then the conversation ends when one of you gets up and leaves for the day. It is a two-way thing, I think. Yeah, I think both sides need to sacrifice, if that's the right word, by coming into the
Yeah.
office. And the senior lawyers definitely need to sacrifice in terms of being
Mm.
uninterrupted.
But I wanted to go back to your career and ask about the most pivotal moments, and moments that, if I ask you, oh, editor, that was it, that was where I knew something, or something happened, when you knew that you've, just reached a milestone or achieved something extraordinary. What do you recall? What comes to mind?
The biggest defining moment in my career has got to be the 2008 global financial crisis, Lehman Brothers collapsing, right? So I was at Bear
Yes.
Stearns when Bear Stearns collapsed.
Wow.
I was. That's the biggest one. I then joined Simmons, and I remember being there for a month. You're trying to work out. I've been in-house for 7.5 years. So, being back in private practice was a bit kind of like, oh wow, what am I doing here? I've been there for a month. We had an offsite, a sort of sector offsite, and I was asked to give a talk about Bear Stearns and sort of collapse of banks and things like that. And that was
Wow.
the weekend that Lehman Brothers collapsed. So I think I gave the talk on a Saturday, and then we came home and my slides were out of date within about 24 hours or something like that. So, and
Wow.
then I was I was a derivatives lawyer, and I had moved to sort of a buy side practice, having been on the sell side all my career. I'd moved to service buy side clients. And I remember coming in on the Monday when Lehman, the UK entity, went into administration, and the absolute panic. We arranged a call, and I think there was something like 1,000, 2,000 people that dialed in, because people had questions. They
Of
just
course.
didn't know what to do. And for about, I don't know, a week, maybe a week and a half, maybe even 2 weeks, it felt like I was on, just like I would put down a phone and immediately I've got a message to call somebody else, because hedge fund clients, buy side clients had never had a counterparty, as one of their banks, default on them before. They didn't know what to do. So what do you do? How do you close somebody out? What is this ISDA agreement I've got? What is this JIMRA agreement I've got, or the prime brokerage agreement? I've just signed this thing. I don't really know what to do. And there
Wow.
was a period where other partners in the department were basically the triage for me and a couple of the other partners who were expert in derivatives, because they were literally passing us notes and we put down the phone and call somebody else who just wanted a run through of the agreement. And after that initial surge, everything that followed from that, the focus on trading agreements, the derivatives regulations, was essentially what my career at Simmons was built on the foundation of that, really. So I have to say that's got to be the defining moment of my career, I think.
That is fantastic and so not only pivotal for the global markets, but obviously, as you said, for your career. I can only imagine. Do you remember that first day at Simmons?
The very first day at Simmons, not so much. I think I was still. My wife says that I was going through the 5 stages of grief after Bear Stearns collapsed, and I'm not sure about that.
That-
I definitely had anger and denial. I remember having anger and denial, but I remember sort of almost joining Simmons in a almost like numb, not quite numb, but in this kind of blur. My head wasn't quite sort of clear, which in hindsight I think was good, because it took away the nerves. I joined there, and really coming back into private practice after 7.5 years of being in-house, coming in as a partner, should have been incredibly daunting. But because I was in this kind of like mind fog, I think in hindsight, that helped
Yes.
take away some of the nerves. I do remember being conscious of the fact that moving back from in-house, being an in-house lawyer, being an in-house lawyer is very different. You learn, you have a kind of
Yes.
like a radar, if you like, for what an issue is. You don't necessarily need to know what the issue exactly is. You just have to have a sense of it, rather than saying, yes, go ahead, that's fine. You say, well, I need to think about this, I need to check it. But you've got somebody else to call if you needed the sort of chapter and verse as to what the issue is. So I was very conscious of the fact that I was moving from that to somebody who's supposed to be at the end of the phone and who's supposed to have the answers, the technical
Yes.
answers.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's probably, I would say, one of the most popular questions I get from our students who join the platform. And when they build up their careers, they first need to face that decision, barrister or solicitor, which we touched upon slightly. But then the second part is, okay, buy side versus sell side, and in-house versus private practice. You ended up obviously in private practice, but was the buy side experience or the in-house experience equally as entertaining and eventful as
Yeah.
private practice?
Yes. Different. I'm not sure I'd like to say which one was better. I don't know myself, really. I enjoyed both. I would say if the global financial crisis hadn't happened, I think I still would be in-house.
Interesting.
And I
Okay.
think I still would be at Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns was a great place to work. I think I still would be in-house. It was never a plan of mine to come back into private practice, and I enjoyed being in-house very much. I mean, what I really enjoyed was the diversity of people. I'm not talking about, culture, ethnicity, or anything like that, but I'm talking about roles. You work in
Yes.
a law firm, you're surrounded by lawyers.
Yes.
You work in-house, where you're surrounded by so many different people doing different things, and I enjoyed that very much. And it taught me a lot. So one of the big things I learned about being in-house was, having an answering the question that you can't get away with talking to, I don't know, a marketer or a trader or something like that by saying, yes, this could be this issue, this issue, the equivalent of a page memo or something like that, and they're left at the end of it thinking, okay, what do I do with that then?
Yeah.
And so I learned during my time in-house to actually answering the question, and I always try to bring that over when I went back into private practice, and clients were sometimes kind enough to sort of say that's what they liked about me, that I answered the question. So
Absolutely.
I think that's very important. I maintain that is very, very important.
I think that's exactly why, you obviously rose to fame for doing exactly that. As we were talking about the global financial crisis, I do want to go back to it and ask you a little bit more about the future.
Okay.
Not that I think you've got a crystal ball. Do let me know if you do. But do you think the industry has learned? I mean, we're approaching every year. There is every year around the anniversary of Lehman collapse, we have these discussions. But I think I really wanted to understand from your perspective, having spent 3 decades in the industry, how has the industry evolved? And do you think we have learned the lessons that we had to learn? And where are we heading, with risk mitigation, documentation, legal risks, etc.?
My view is that these things come in cycles. I'm not predicting a new crash or anything like that anytime soon or anything like that, but I think certainly in the immediate aftermath of the crash, so 2008 to, let's say, I don't know, 2010, 2012 or something like that, the stuff that I was doing, trading agreements, derivative agreements, counterparty risk, was front and center, whereas previously it was nowhere.
Yes.
I was speaking to clients who signed hedge funds that were setting up and things like that, who signed documentation literally without reading it. They were just given it, told it was standard, they'd sign it, and when they came to me after Lehman collapsed, they didn't know that they basically just signed away the whole branch, right? They just didn't know that. And they weren't aware of it. So especially those people who had that experience of being burned, it became front and center. So that launched my sort of practice at Simmons. But I noticed even during my time at Simmons that kind of tailed off. The longer it went off, the less people were concerned about it. And it's complacency happens again, right? The other big thing that's happened in the aftermath of the GFC was clearly the regulation, right? We clearly moved in the derivatives field from a model of self-regulation, which kind of meant no regulation, to heavily regulated. I always view regulation as reactive rather than, they try to be proactive, but it is essentially reactive.
Yes.
I view it pouring water in a plastic bag, holding the bag up, and then you see where all the holes are because that's where all the water comes out, right? No regulation is going to cover off all the risks going forward. Because it could only see and can only react to what has happened, where the gaps were in the past. So regulation is always, in my mind, a step or so behind the actual market events.
What are some of the biggest lessons you think you've learned, not only about the industry, but about yourself as a person, having spent so many years working with clients globally?
Lots of people forget that we're working in a financial service industry. The key word for me, not being finance, but being service, right? We are all
Beautiful.
providing a service. And some people may say, oh, no, I'm a client. Well, yes, if you're an in-house lawyer and you're talking to somebody like I was, yes, you're the client, you're the consumer, and I'm the provider there. But you've got internal clients, right? So
Absolutely.
you're a provider to service to them. You're talking to, I don't know, a salesperson or a marketer. To the in-house lawyer, they're a consumer of legal services, but they've got clients. So everybody at some point is a provider of service. That leads to a kind of humility, if you like, right?
Yes.
Lack of ego. None of us is that important. Nobody is indispensable. When I retired, I left the department, I think, in a good place. And you sort of like to think that, oh, yes, they're going to miss me. And to a certain extent, miss personal relationships, that sort of thing. But actually, I'm not that important. If you leave somewhere in a good place, it will carry on without you and go on to better successes without you, because I don't think any one person is that important in what we do.
Thank you for this beautiful insight. When we work in this environment that is so dynamic, that's got so many characters, that's got so many pressure points and moments where people lose their cool, as one would say, how do you manage that? How do you stay, I think the question is really, how do you stay true to your values and principles whilst dealing with multi-million-dollar deals, documents that need to be signed this hot minute, other people who are really in the midst of a big, financial situation, a deal that's about to be concluded? Are there any tips? Is there anything that you've developed? Is there a toolbox that Allan has that you can share with us that would always work for you?
Self-awareness, I think, is very important, right? You talked about keeping to your values and things like that. I think the first part of that is knowing yourself, knowing your strengths, and reminding yourself of your strengths, which is important, I think, especially during the pressure times, but also knowing your areas of weakness or development. One thing I've said to lawyers or people joining my department was, I don't want cookie cutter people. There's no one way to success. It's very easy, especially in this sort of the social media world, where there's one way, there's one template to success, right? You're loud, you speak a lot at meetings, things. I'm not really interested in any of that, right? I like diversity in team. If there's somebody who is quiet and thoughtful, there's a place for that person. That person
Yes.
doesn't need to be told, no, to get the promotion, to get ahead, you need to become loud. You need to throw yourself about a bit more. You don't need to do that,
Yes.
right? That's not your strength. If that makes you uncomfortable, you don't need to do that. You need to find a place, hopefully, that there are more of these places where you can be yourself, your authentic self, and still succeed.
That is so interesting that you see it in a very different way. But I wanted to ask you, as we're at this moment of advising, giving tips, what is some of the best advice you received in your career that you recall has made a difference?
When I was at Bear Stearns, and I mentioned earlier that the head of department and the deputy head had left after being there for 10 years, which was a big structural rehaul and things like that. I remember that the general counsel from New York flew over to talk to the London legal department, and he came up with this line that we all laughed at the time. He came across, I won't do the American accent, but he came across and said, with great change comes great opportunity. And we all laughed, and I was like, oh, I've heard that before. It sounds like Uncle Ben talking to Peter Parker, the Spider-Man speech.
Yes.
With great power comes great responsibility. And that just reminded me of that. And we laughed about it. But actually, he was right. Now, whatever it is, 20 years later or whatever it is, I look back and think, oh, you know what? That's actually right. And I can see that in my own career. And I mentioned it earlier, there is always luck or God in one's career. Things that happen that are outside your control, circumstances change, people leave or whatever, some market crash or something like that. They provide, that's a great change. And you can say, oh no, I wasn't ready for that. I thought my career was going to go this way or that way. But actually, it also provides opportunity if you're ready for it.
And what do you consider your biggest victory?
I love it when junior lawyers that I've helped be part of their journey are successful. It's a small industry. There are lots of people in it, but it is a relatively small industry. And that's a really good point, which sort of reminds me of another lesson, I think, which is really work hard not to burn your bridges with people, because you don't know when you're going to encounter them again. There are people that a very select group of people over my career that have on the bingo card of my relationship with them, whether there's two people where they've been a colleague, we've worked at the same place. I've been the in-house lawyer, they've been the outside lawyer. I've been the outside lawyer, they've been the in-house lawyer. There's that bingo card of like, okay, that really illustrates the fact that actually you've got to really work hard not to burn your bridges, because you just don't know when you're going to encounter them again and in what capacity.
Exactly. I think that is such a pivotal point in my career. I think one of the best advice I received was from then General Counsel at Credit Suisse. And she said to me, always remember who you meet on your way up, because you never know who you're going to meet on your way down. But as we approaching to a close, I want to ask you, if you don't mind, what are some of the key secrets to a successful negotiation that you would be willing to share, and perhaps those lawyers who are trying to really advance in their knowledge but also become better negotiators?
It's that concept of the win-win, right? I always told my team, don't see it as a battle of one side against the other. It's very easy to say that because you say, oh, the other side of the table, the other side of the negotiation. You're talking about sides, very tribal, right? But
yes,
I see it not as a battle. If you view it more as both sides want to reach the same goal, which is a finalized agreement signed that both sides are comfortable with or not unhappy with, right? If you view it at that high level, you're actually pulling in the same direction. So firstly, the mindset that you go into it of what you're aiming for, and the other side is not your enemy. You're not out there to kill them. You're not out there to win and they are to lose or anything like that, right? So, and that also filters down then to mean that you've got to take the ego out of it. Just because you're conceding a point, it doesn't mean you've lost, right? It's not personal. I've come across lawyers in my team in the past who get really worked up over something. So, I don't want to give in this point. So, don't think of it as giving in. There's always sort of give and take on these things, right? So that's really, really important. And I think also being aware of the terrain. And what I mean by that is be aware of the other person's position. Right. If you are approaching this as I'm going to a zero-sum game, I'm going to win this point, and that means you're going to lose this point, and I'm going to humiliate you and grind you into the ground. How is that helpful? Especially if that person's on the call, let's say, or on an email chain with their internal clients. How is that going to be helpful? Point out they're wrong, you're right, admit you're wrong, that kind of thing. I have this. Throughout my career, I have this little booklet of Sun Tzu quotes. He was this Chinese general from the first millennium, right? And the one I always told my team in negotiation is this quote about when you're facing an army that you're trying to get to retreat, leave them a way out, right? Don't fight them and with their back to the wall. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, with a back to the wall, because then they've got no choice but to fight to the death. So when you're negotiating and you think you've got a really strong point, and you need to leave the other person a way to concede the point, but gracefully and without being humiliated, being able to save face, especially in front of their internal clients. That's really, really important. I always do that. And I think the last one is, whether you're an in-house lawyer, knowing who your internal clients, what their priorities are, what their key points are, right? Knowing
Absolutely.
there's no point spending ages, loads of time and loads of negotiation capital, negotiating, I don't know, a force majeure clause, because you're
Yeah.
adamant that the word pandemic must be in there and the other side didn't want to put it in there. What's the point if your
Yeah.
client doesn't really care about that? Don't focus
Absolutely.
on that, right? And my last one would be understand the agreement that you're negotiating really well. Has paramount. You will have encountered this. I say to my team, I never want you to say as a bargaining or as a response, it's standard. This clause is standard, or even worse, oh, we always do it this way.
Yes.
No, you've got to understand what the clauses are. If you understand what the clauses are, you can talk about it. Nobody wants to hear it's been done this way before. Nobody's ever asked this question before. Well, I'm asking it now. So you need to understand your agreement so that you can talk about it.
Oh my God, so many golden nuggets there. Thank you so much. That is such a great segue as well to the escalation point. The industry is famous for putting the pressures on not only lawyers, but obviously the business, the traders, etc. And the word escalation comes up a lot. So I just wanted to ask you, how have you dealt in your career with various escalations and the pressures that the industry is famous for? And whether there is an escalation that comes to mind that you resolved surprisingly quickly, or that should not have been, an escalation even in the first place. But this is the word that, if I was thinking about banking and finance, comes to mind immediately. Escalation. Let's escalate this. Let's tell someone else and see how they can help us.
Yes. Yeah. That word is used a lot in the context of negotiations, and sometimes it almost becomes like a threat. Sometimes
Yes.
when it's used, it's kind of like, oh, you've asked this. Oh, I need to escalate this.
Escalate.
Okay, so why is that such a bad thing? You've got to go and talk to somebody who's an actual decision maker. Well, that's actually shouldn't be a problem. Shouldn't actually be a problem, right? It's not a bad word, though. It is used as a semi-threat. Escalation, I guess, at a more non-specific meaning of the word, in sort of something becoming very heated. Yeah. I think what's important there, it will happen to everybody in this industry at one point or another. Somebody's going to attack you in some way that you think is unfair, make accusations against you which you think are unfair. I think what's important there is some of the stuff that we talked about before. Keeping calm, not retaliating, yes. Being professional, remaining professional, friendly if possible. I remember a time when, I won't name names, at a time when I was doing a negotiation for an important client of mine, and there was a senior in-house lawyer at the bank on the other side of the negotiation table who was, let's say, challenging. We had a challenging relationship. Let's put it that way. Right? And this person, at one stage in the negotiation, would get quite angry, and at one stage even threatened to report me to the Law Society. Right? So he said, I think you've breached client confidentiality here. I'm considering reporting you to the Law Society. And you look at that, and you think, whoa, where did that come from? Right? So, but I try to respond to that professionally, keep calm, right? Be confident in yourself, trust yourself. I hadn't breached client confidentiality, hope that goes without saying. Speak to the client. We've got good client relationships. Client was totally on side, knew that it was essentially it was a bit of an underhand negotiation tactic. Right? When something escalates to that kind of level, you just have to trust yourself, trust that you've done the right things, speak to the right people, if you speak to the clients and things like that, and just make sure you at least do the right thing. You act professionally. You can't control what other people do. You can always control how you act in a situation.
I think that's such a beautiful conclusion. And from my perspective, every time we come across people that are challenging, and it's so funny because I always use the same words to describe people who are a little bit more forceful with their points. They're challenging. Every time I see that, I go into gratitude and say, thank you. That's just another beautiful opportunity for me to self-define and do something that, just re-establishes me and in my values. How do you define a good leader, Allan? You've led a team of many aspiring lawyers for many, many years. And I know from experience and having encountered them as well in my professional career, how much admiration they have for you. What is the secret to a great leadership?
I think I can talk about how I approach leadership, and then leave others to decide whether to take it or leave it. I think in any organization, there's going to be hierarchy. People talk about flat structures and things like that, but that's kind of conceptual. There is always going to be hierarchy. But if you're in a leadership position, how you exercise that hierarchy and how you exercise your position as the leader is up to you, I think. I think if you're confident in yourself, I think invite challenge. I always invite challenge. I never liked to be somebody who says, okay, I decide this and everybody just go and execute it. And that's not just because I feel like I'm running a democracy or anything like that. It's really because I am firmly of the view that the more views you have, the better the decision is going to be. The greater the diversity of views, the better the decision is going to be. The worst thing you want is to come into a room and say, I think we should do this, and everybody says, oh yeah, great idea, go and do it. And then you go and do it, and then something happens that you think, oh, I didn't see that coming. The more challenges there are to something, the better the result's going to be, because when the challenges come after you try and execute whatever it is, you're ready for it. Hopefully you're ready for it because somebody's already challenged you internally. What I always said to my team was, I like being challenged. I like the debate on a legal point or whatever it is. Ultimately, I will hear all views, but ultimately the decision is mine. So everybody is free to express their view. Once I decide on the course of that we're going to take, everybody has to fall in line with that, even if they disagree with it. And the second thing I think is treating your team members, getting them as invested as much in the business plan, your business, the team, as possible. And that means things like as much transparency as possible in terms of letting them know what's going on, giving them as much responsibility and say in decisions. The more people feel that sense of ownership, the more invested they are in the business, the better they are going to be in that.
Yes.
And I think as leaders, it's our responsibility to help them on that journey and give them that sense of ownership and that sense of their direction of their own career. Because another thing I say to associates was nobody is as interested or as invested in your career as yourself.
Yes.
Right? Nobody else is going to be as interested as yourself. You may think, oh, I've got these great mentors, this great boss, they're always looking out for me. And hopefully that's true. But even with all that, they are not as invested in your career as you are yourself. You've always got to think of your own career. Don't think, I'm doing a great job, so, that promotion will come or that pay rise will come automatically. At the junior levels, it might.
Yes.
But as you progress, you've got to be proactive. You've got to be intentional about it, laying down markers in the sand to let your boss, your manager, know what you're expecting. Because if they don't know what you're expecting, they may not give it to you.
I think we've got so many amazing nuggets. I really appreciate your time, Allan. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
I hope it's not the last time we meet. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. I just wanted to extend my personal thanks for all your contribution, not only to this conversation, but to the industry. And everything that you've accomplished throughout the years has had a tremendous impact on a number of lives.
Thank you very much for the conversation, and thank you for those kind words. I enjoyed it.